Everybody, welcome to the members webinar, First and Penalty Abatement, presented by Steve Klitzner. We have a handout if you look on the right side of your screen, and that is the PowerPoint that you'll be shown throughout the presentation. Steve?
I'm here, Julie.
All right.
Are you ready to roll?
We're ready.
All right, and I'm just taking a look here at the questions, making sure that everybody has sound. We had a little bit of a problem, but it looks like everybody's good, so let's get cooking. I'm Steve Klitzner. I'm an attorney in South Florida, and I only do what we're talking about today, and that's IRS resolution work, collections and audits for individuals and businesses. And I wanted to talk today about a great tool that we use, which is first-time penalty abatement. But before I do that, a couple of just background things I wanted to talk about. You know, with the budget cut, it's creating a little bit of a problem for the people in our business because there's not as many revenue officers, lien filings are down, levies are down. But the good news is people can't get through to the IRS. They can't speak to anybody there. So that's a good reason that they need us. And the other thing is, because the IRS is so backlogged, we've really been getting some great deals with revenue officers. There seem to be far easier now to just get them to put certain clients into uncollectible status and just move to the next one. So with the cuts and with the lack of the IRS really moving forward, at least people still need us, and they need us a lot. I got to tell you a story. Should I tell you the good one or the bad one? Let me tell you the bad one first. I have to vent. Is it okay if I vent? See, that's what I like about webinars. I can't see anybody say no, so I assume everybody said yes. I had a situation this morning with a revenue officer, and I've dealt with her a lot. I've had my run-ins with her. She's one of those revenue officers who runs hot and cold. Odd number days, she's very nice and pleasant. Even number days, she's like off her medication. She's very difficult to deal with. And today was an even number day. And my history with her, we had a real big run-in a few years ago when she called my client when I had power of attorney. I called her on the phone. Rather than call her supervisor, I decided to face her face-to-face, and I said to her, you know, I'm looking through the IRS manual, and I can't see where it allows you to talk to my client if I'm not on the phone, or to talk to him at all if I have power of attorney. And she said, well, I called you, and you weren't in, so I called your client to see whether or not you were still power of attorney on the case. And I said to her, hold on, wait a minute, wait. Looking through the manual, yeah, I really don't see where it allows you to call my client if you call me and I'm not in. I said, why don't you give me the name of your supervisor, and the next time I call you and you're not in, I'll call your supervisor to see whether you're still on the case. And after that, we got along pretty good for a while. But today she did something, and this may have happened to some of you, and that's why I want to bring it up, because it's a very important issue, and I'm sure people run into this all the time. I requested a collection due process hearing because she sent me a final notice of intent to levy, and I also sent her all the financial information with a collection alternative. Well, of course, she says, why do you always have to file collection due process hearings? And from her standpoint, taxpayers shouldn't have any rights. There's no reason to exercise those rights. And I said to her what I usually say. I said, well, you know, you really didn't have to file the final notice of intent to levy, and then I wouldn't have asked for a CDP. And then her answer was, well, you know, if I don't do that and you don't comply, I have nothing I can do. I have no recourse. But she doesn't understand my side of the story, that if I can't resolve the case with her with a collection due process hearing, I at least have someone to go to, and I have tax court rights if they abuse their discretion. That just, you know, it's like talking to a tax protester sometimes when you speak to the people at the IRS. You explain to them every reason why they need to file the returns, And while paying taxes is constitutional, and at the end you say you understand, and you say yes, and at the same time they're shaking their head no. They just don't get it. So I had a little run-in with her today. We went back and forth for a while. She didn't really want to hear what I had to say, but the lesson here is this. When you receive a final notice of intent to levy, you can request a collection due process hearing and still deal with the revenue officer. As a matter of fact, you have to now with the AJAC appeals, because the settlement officers don't want to any longer be super revenue officers and work the cases. They want the case worked, and they want to make a decision whether or not you were treated fairly. So I'm still willing to work with the revenue officer. I'll give the revenue officer everything, but I'm not going to withdraw my one chance to stop the revenue officer if we can't come to an agreement. So just be very careful that you do request your CDPs. Don't withdraw them just because the revenue officer wants you to. Tell them you'll be happy to work with them, but you want that right to go to somebody else who's going to listen to it. Because if you don't do that and they deny your installment agreement, you're going to get a manager who's just going to rubber stamp what the revenue officer said. You're going to do a cap appeal, and they're going to rubber stamp it too, and now you're going to be at the mercy of a revenue officer who's going to levy. But here's one good story. With a revenue officer, one of my favorite, we're losing a lot of revenue officers. You know, with the budget cut, we're not getting anybody new. Some are getting promoted, some are getting transferred, and many are retiring. I spoke to a revenue officer yesterday, and he was just talking about the fact that they don't get the training that they did before. The older people are leaving, so there's no mentors. A lot of them are working out of their houses, so they don't even have any interaction to help each other out. And he has 2 years, 3 months, 4 days before he retires. He's ready to rock and roll as soon as he can get out of there. And we're seeing that a lot. And the new people coming in, what few there are just not being trained properly. And it's really up to us very often to train them. But one of my favorite revenue officers, we lost a few bad ones, but we lost some real good ones in South Florida. And one of my favorites was retiring on a Friday, just about 2 months ago. And on Monday, I got a new case that was hers right before she retired, and she had gotten no cooperation from the taxpayer, and she levied his account. He owed about $500,000, and she got about $260,000 from two accounts. One was a small account. One was where the majority of the money was. And I called her on Tuesday, and she said, there's nothing I can do about this. By Wednesday, I had her releasing the smaller account, and by Thursday, I had her thinking about the bigger account, and on Friday, the day she retired, she released the whole $260,000. It was kind of a going-away present. I guess she felt bad we weren't going to work together anymore. And boy, I'll tell you, when they find out at her office what she did, she's going to be in trouble, but not much they can do to her now. So that was my little going-away present. One other thing I wanted to mention, on December 6th, for 20 days, it's the IRS policy till December 26th not to levy, especially on individuals. We see them not levy on businesses so much, but individuals aren't going to see levies. So we kind of have a few weeks off. The bad news is, seems on December 5th they issue 1 million levies, and then they go on vacation. But if you can get into December, you'll probably be home free and get your clients into the new year. So let's go over some first-time penalty abatement. And here's the front sheet. There's my contact information. As always, if anybody has any questions, whether it's on this or anything else they want to run it by me, always feel free to give me a call. I'll be happy to help you out and see what I can do for you. All right, hang on here. Let's see if we can get to the next one. And here it is, the first-time penalty abate. This is the IRM section. Hold on. Okay, and here it is, 20.1.1.3.6.1, and you'll see that this IRM section, excuse me, went into effect August 5th, 2014. But believe it or not, it's been around since 2001. And for many years, we were getting letters where we'd send a incredibly great penalty abatement letter with all the good reasonable cause, and we'd get back a letter saying, no, we didn't buy anything you said, but we're going to give you a one-time penalty abatement. And I used to look at those and go, wait a minute, I had such good reasons. What are they doing? Can I appeal this? Well, no, you can't appeal it. They gave me the penalty abatement, but it used to upset me a great deal. But this first-time abatement has become very hot over the last several years. We're seeing more and more of it, and I read an estimate that about 90% of the people who qualify for it don't ask for it. And here's a shocker. If you don't ask for it, they're not going to give it to you. Nobody's going to offer it to you. Certainly the revenue officers don't always even understand it. No one's going to offer you a first-time penalty abatement. So I wanted to go over the IRM with you. And this is a very, very valuable tool. You know, there's two tools I think of that, other than the basic options, that we can offer value to the taxpayer. One of them is when the tax gets paid, or when it gets under $25,000 in an installment agreement, we can get the lien withdrawn as it never existed. And the other is the first-time penalty abatement, where we can offer the folks a lot of money back and make them very happy. Now, while we're going through this today, if you have any questions, put it in the question box. I'll get them all by the end here, and we'll go through them. But also, I want to hear about any first-time penalty experiences any of you have had. Because whenever I do a presentation, I do as much research as I can. I look at the code, I look at the IRM. In this case, there is an IRM on what we're talking about that we're going to go through. I talk to people at the IRS. I talk to people who deal with this and talk to managers and supervisors and get their take on it so that I have a better idea of what the IRS is doing. And that way, any questions that come up, I'll be able to answer. But there is one disclaimer here today. May not be able to answer every question because I don't know the answers, and neither does the IRS, to some specifics about first-time penalty abatement. In fact, usually when we go through the IRM, we take a look and we see things, for instance, on offer and compromise. And you look at it, and this is, of course, the IRS follows the Internal Revenue Manual 100% of the time, unless they don't like what it says, and they don't follow it. And it's our job to hold their feet to the fire if we like what it says. And very often, there's things in the Internal Revenue Manual that are just great for the taxpayer that the IRS just ignores, and it's our job to point it out to them. But with first-time abatement, when I go through the Internal Revenue Manual, what I find in practice is a lot better than what it looks like it says here. And I'm going to go over what it has here, but this is one of the few times with the IRS that you might as well try to see if it works. It may or may not work. Certain things like an offer and compromise, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You can't submit an offer if somebody owns a house outright and you don't want to put the equity of the house in. But with first-time penalty abatement, with all penalty abatement, as a matter of fact, it's always worth taking a shot and developing your own system and figuring out what works for you. And the secret to dealing with the IRS, one of the great secrets is, if something works, just keep doing it. Doesn't work, well, maybe you try it again, maybe you fine-tune it a little bit until it works, but when it works, you keep doing it until it doesn't work anymore. So I have my own little systems, what we do in the office here, which works for first-time abatement, which I'll talk about. But for the most part, if you find something different, well, put it down in the question box and let us know what you find, and I'll give you my thoughts, my feelings, and what the IRS has told me. And I have gotten, just in the last couple of weeks when I'm preparing for this, and I've talked to revenue officers, I've talked to ACS, I've talked to the penalty hotline, and whoever you talk to has got a whole different take on first-time abatement. So let's go through it, and we'll talk about it a little bit now. And remember the whole thing behind penalties, and that's to deter taxpayer noncompliance, not to generate revenue. But it does seem that it works a little differently with the IRS. So here is what the Internal Revenue Manual Code section we just talked about said. And it talks about the reasonable cause assistant, the RCA. And that's what the IRS uses when they're making a determination on penalty abatement and on first-time abatement. First, we've got failure to file. It works for that. For individuals, it works for partnerships, it works for S-corps. Failure to pay works. If someone hasn't paid their taxes, you can get a first-time abatement on that. And also federal tax deposits. It works on failing to deposit for businesses. So that's something we always keep in mind on all cases. It's allowed if the following are true. First thing is, if the taxpayer has not previously been required to file a return or has no prior penalties for the preceding 3 years. So you take a look at the section of the of the transcript, and that'll tell you their 3-year history. All right, so let me take a little commercial now, because what I use for that is tax help software. Google Tax Help Software. Take a look at their website. For $350 a year, and you get an incredible printout of transcripts that work for a lot of things. And what it works for incredibly is first-time abatement, because what it does is it shows us every year where there's been penalties, so we can see what we're eligible for first-time abatement. And Roger Nemeth will be at the Tax Resolution Marketing and Technology Extravaganza. He owns Tax Help Software. And so you can talk to him then, or you can call him now, or Google him and tell him you heard it from ASTPS, and they give you a 10% discount, which is a good time for a nice little commercial announcement, and that is that ASTPS and Michael Rosbrook have assembled for the 2nd year in a row in Orlando from January 6th to January 8th, the Tax Resolution Marketing and Technology Extravaganza. And let me tell you something. I love things that end in extravaganza because they're always good, and I can assure you you're going to learn a great deal about marketing and technology that's going to help your business. And that kind of leads us to what we're talking about today, because I'm sure that there's going to be some presentation by Larry and by Michael and by a lot of the presenters concerning offering value to your clients. And first-time penalty abatement is one of my favorite ways to sell value, because that will tell you, that will give something to your taxpayer client that he wasn't expecting, or maybe he was expecting and didn't know he could get, that you can really offer him some valuable information. So my commercial's over for the extravaganza in Orlando. I urge you to, if you can make it there, make it. This is one of those things, though. Yes, you can buy, I'm sure, the CDs when it's over, but if you want the maximum experience, and there's going to be some great networking of some top tax professionals around the country who are doing their marketing and doing their sales and offering value to the taxpayers, good time for you to network and talk with them. Okay, so I'm done with that, but I did want to bring that up. The second thing here is, in order for you to get it, you have to have filed a valid extension for all currently required returns and paid or arranged to pay any tax due. Now, I'm not so sure that they follow this. We have quite a few cases. I can't tell you for sure on the not unfiled returns, but we have quite a few cases where we have not yet entered into an installment agreement, and we are able to get the IRS, and we'll talk about specifically how to abate the penalties with the first-time penalty abatement. So that's one of those things where I say, even though it says it there, it's still worth trying. Now, let me give you a little practice tip of something that we do. I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but I want to tell you one of the ways that first-time penalty abatement works if you do it early on. Let's say your taxpayer client owes $55,000, and you want to get into a streamlined installment agreement. You don't want to give them any financial information. And let's say also no tax lien's been filed yet, and you want to stop a lien from being filed. Well, if the taxpayer comes up with $5,000 and gets it under $50,000, you can do your 6-year streamlined installment agreement. It'll be about $750 a month. No lien gets filed. everybody's happy, it works perfectly. What we do, if the client can't come up with the $5,000, is we immediately do a first-time penalty abatement. And we have been able to get it under 50, or at least close enough to 50, where they can immediately do the streamline agreement. So that's something you've got to keep in mind early on. I don't like, and I'll talk about it later, the fact that if you get this first-time abatement on failure to pay, it will abate it, and failure to pay will start up again, and you got to get it abated at the end. So usually on failure to pay, we wait until the end of the case or close to the end of the case before we get our first-time penalty abatement. But keep that in mind. Now, listen, sometimes you don't need a first-time abatement. If the client's uncollectible, if they're doing an offer in compromise, they're going to do bankruptcy, you don't need it. But if you're in an installment agreement or you're a full pay, first-time penalty abatement is a very valuable tool. And as I said, despite what it says here, you are able to sometimes, I don't think we've had a problem with it yet, get a first-time abatement even if you're not in a payment plan at the present time. Now, consider the taxpayer current if he has an open installment agreement or current with his or her installment payment. That comes out of the IRM, but as I said, we don't see that coming into play. And there's also a note in that section, if they're not currently in compliance but all other FTA criteria are met, provide the taxpayer an opportunity to fully comply and get into compliance. I can't tell you for sure if they won't abate if there's unfiled returns. I asked around the office. No one has remembered any time it's come up. I assume there have been times where our clients don't have all the returns filed. So keep that in mind, that you can try it at any time, and it may work. And you can do it. There's no oral statement of $40 threshold. And I don't quite understand what they mean by that here. Yes, you can ask for it orally, and sometimes, I'll go into later, they do want it in writing. And if they do, you have to do. But here's one of the great things about first-time abatement. If you don't like what the first person says, if you call back, the next person may give you a different answer. That happens a lot with things with the IRS, and we certainly see it here. One person says, I can't do it. You're going to have to send it in. You're going to have to write a letter. We call back a few minutes later, and that person says, I can manually do it. You're done, and we save a lot of money. But just, you never know until you ask. And on this, it's certainly worth asking. Now, any penalty assessed and then reversed in full shows compliance. So if there was a penalty and the penalty got completely taken away, either you got a full penalty abatement based on reasonable cause, or maybe it was a substitute for return. There was a bunch of penalty for not filing on time, not paying on time. You filed correct returns. Taxpayer owed nothing. All penalty goes away. None of those penalties count. You still got the 3-year rule. And they will consider all of those when they do a first-time abatement analysis. It can apply, can only apply to a single tax period within a type of tax. If you request a penalty relief for 2 or more periods on the same type of tax, the earliest meets the FTA criteria, then they're going to give it based on the earliest period. And penalty relief for all subsequent periods will be based on reasonable cause. So here's the thing that I find a lot. Sometimes the first year eligible for first-time penalty abatement is $1,000. Let's say 2005, they have $1,000 penalty. 2006, it's $20,000 in penalty. We can't pick and choose. We're stuck with the earliest period, whether we like it or not. Now, if it's not significant, the amount, we can get them to ignore that period. The question is, what's significant? And later we'll see in the IRM, it says the word significant, but we don't know what significant it is. I have been told it's $100 or less, but you always should try it if it's a small amount, to have them ignore it as insignificant. That's what the IRM says, and have them give you a first-time penalty abatement on the earliest year, which hopefully has a lot of money at stake. You know, I'll tell you something funny, and this happens every single time. Client comes in, new case, Looks like they're going to pay with an installment agreement. I'm thinking about penalty abatement. I'm thinking about reasonable cause, but I'm also thinking about the first-time abatement. They tell me they owe for, let's say, 2009, 10, 11, all right, 12, 13, 14. And I say to them, now wait, you don't owe for 8, 7, or 6. File and pay those on time. They always say yes. Well, invariably, when I look at that, those years also have penalties. And we're going to talk about later how to take care of those. So until you see the transcripts, and if you want to use tax help software, that'll give you the answer without you having to go through each individual transcript. If you don't see any penalties for 3 years, you're good to go. So now the next question is, what if the taxpayer has penalty in 2005 and then again in 2009? Well, 6, 7, and 8, there's no penalty. There's no penalty, and for the 3 years before 2005 is no penalty. Can you get a penalty abatement for both of those periods? And the answer is, according to the IRM, it doesn't appear you can. But in practice, you may be able to do it, and we've done it. Sometimes you can on these, sometimes you can't. You just have to try. As I said before, it's one of the few times with the IRS where you just try and it may actually work. What we do, the strategy there, is we try to get rid of the penalty on the largest year. So 2008 has a larger penalty than 05. We're going to take a shot at that first, then we'll do 05. If 05 is bigger, we get it for 05, and then we later do it for 08. We do those separately, and we see if we can get them to do a first-time penalty abatement because there's 3 years clear. It's not completely clear in the IRM whether or not we can do that. It looks like you can't, but in practice, we can do it. So keep that in mind and take a shot at both, but go for your biggest year first. The reasonable cause explanation will be considered after they conduct the first-time abatement analysis. And that's a little contradictory to what we see in what other places in the IRM. What I try to do is always use reasonable cause first. I don't want to waste my first time. So we always hit them with reasonable cause first. If that doesn't work, we do a first-time abatement. And if that doesn't apply, first-time abatement, then they'll look at reasonable cause. But I think it should be vice versa. I think you need to try to get reasonable cause, try to fully abate the penalty, and then later on, for a subsequent year, you're going to be eligible for the first-time penalty abatement. Here are the situations where the first-time abatement is not going to apply. Tax year period in the last 3 years with a penalty, not going to work. An unreimbursed penalty for a significant amount is present on the tax period in the 3 years prior. Again, a significant amount. We understand it's $100. I can't find that in writing. I can't trick them into telling me that. But that's what it looks like it is. If it's close to that, I would argue that it's not a significant amount. And a total of 4 or more failure to deposit penalty waiver codes are present in the 3 years prior. So on payroll tax cases, if they've been waiving failure to deposit penalties, they're not going to be your first time on that year. Just keep that in mind and take a look and keep a lookout for that. If they determine that the first-time abatement is applicable, they're going to send you a nice letter containing a paragraph telling you that your penalty has been abated. Here's what the paragraph looks like. We are pleased to I love when something starts with we are pleased to inform you. That usually means something good. That your request to remove, and then they're going to name the penalty, has been granted. However, this action is taken solely on your compliance history rather than any information you provided. So they're basically saying you lose on reasonable cause, you win on first time. You've used up your first time. And here's the only time anywhere in this manual section I see one time. It says this tax penalty removal is a one-time consideration available only for a first-time penalty charge. That's the only place I find the term one time. It seems to indicate maybe it is, but it doesn't say one time anywhere else, which leads me to believe you can do it multiple times as long as you have a 3-year cleared history. and they'll base their decision on removing any future penalties based on the usual reasonable cause. Let me take a quick departure onto reasonable cause because I'm not going to spend a lot of time on reasonable cause. That would take another couple of hours. But with reasonable cause, I find that we request reasonable cause penalty with either the revenue officer with ACS, or we write it in, and it invariably gets denied no matter what I said, no matter how well I write it up. I mean, sometimes they grant it, of course, if it's a slam dunk. And when I go to appeals, I've generally been finding the appeals officer basically writing me a letter, which for the most part says, you lose, but if you want to talk to me, I'll talk to you. Or basically, you just lose, and then I want a hearing, and I talk to them, and generally I still lose. I had one very recently in the last couple of weeks where I actually had an appeals officer say to me, well, you know, I need this or this, and I'll take a look at it. So I actually have somebody willing not just to look at the screen and rubber stamp the loss, but a real appeals officer who's willing to listen and give me some sort of abatement. If I'm lucky enough, and I can't get face-to-faces on these, I've tried, occasionally I have, if I can get it face-to-face, if I can get somebody with my usual suspects here in South Florida with one of the appeals officers, I can generally get them to give me something. They just don't want me to drive them nuts. They're afraid I'm going to drive down there and talk to them in person. They won't be able to get me out of their office. So they'll give me something just to get rid of me or keep me from coming out there. But I don't always get it locally. Now, here's some of the types of taxes where penalty abatement first time doesn't apply. Estate tax cases doesn't apply. Gift tax returns doesn't apply. This daily delinquency penalty is on organizations or trusts, doesn't apply there. The 1120S's, it doesn't apply if in the 3 years prior at least one was filed late but not penalized. They will give you a first-time penalty abatement on 1120S's, and we see those quite a bit where people haven't filed their returns a lot of times for many years with 1120S's. We can at least get the first year done, or any sort of information reporting that's dependent on another filing. And this list, the IRS notes, is not all-inclusive, which means you never know what they're going to bring up a little bit later on. Now, if the tax isn't paid on the tax period when the request for abatement is received and the taxpayer is current with installment agreement, they'll allow a first-time abatement on the failure to pay penalty. So we do this a lot. We usually wait till it gets down to a small amount on the installment agreement request, and we call and we wipe it out. Look at that note. It says that the employee is going to need to use an open paragraph to inform the taxpayer that the failure to pay penalty will start accruing again and will continue until the tax is paid in full. After the tax is paid in full, you can request abatement of the additional failure to pay penalty. So don't forget that if you've earlier on gotten the penalty, gotten the IRS to give you a first-time penalty, do not forget that you need to get the failure to pay penalty abated again when the tax is paid. Failure to file penalty, of course, it's at 22.5%, 4.5% a month for 5 months. Once you get that abated, it goes away. But that 0.5% penalty on failure to pay doesn't go away. The failure to pay penalty, when they start collection, goes up to 1%. When you're in an installment agreement, it goes down to 0.25%, and it maxes out at 25%. So, you know, on these cases, we're saving taxpayers sometimes 47.5% on penalty. And if we get lucky, it's a big year, and we can save them sometimes tens of thousands of dollars. It's really remarkable what we can save them, and it's actually very rewarding, and you really feel good about it when you can save them that money. Now, here are a couple of other notes. Penalty for underpayment of estimated tax by individuals does not disqualify a taxpayer from first-time abatement. Very often you're going to see that a taxpayer has not paid in enough money in the current year, and they get hit with a usually small underpayment of estimated tax penalty. Don't let the IRS sister tell you that they can't get the penalty abatement because of that. And whenever they deny a penalty abatement or first-time abatement, just like any other abatement, you can always request an appeal. And when you get to appeal, you'll probably get an appeals officer who doesn't know that much about penalty abatements because, as I said before, 90% of the people leave it on the table and don't get the money, and they're going to have to research it too. So as long as you've got the IRM in hand, you should be able to show them that they should indeed abate the penalty. Here's the assistance line. This is direct line for penalty assistance. And they will help you on penalty abatement. However, we don't generally use them. We have actually had more success with ACS. And you could also use the practitioner priority line. So whatever you're having success with, do it. We find sometimes, they're using the same system, and you would think the people in this department would be well qualified to get rid of these things. But I was talking to one the other day in preparation for this. Not a clue, folks. She was making it up as I go. I didn't bother correcting her. Wasn't necessary. But she really didn't understand the specifics of how first-time abatement works. But you're free to call this line. Now, you may call, and they may say, it's too much money, we got to write it in. You got to write a request for penalty abatement. And I was talking to a revenue officer yesterday on a case, and boy, she was so clueless on first-time abatement. She said, send me something with reasonable cause. I said, I don't have to send you anything with reasonable cause. I want a first-time abatement. So, well, you got to write it in. You got to mail it to me, and I'll use the assister, and I'll figure it out. So she had absolutely no idea. Hopefully, she'll be able to do it manually if she can't just get it done, or I'll have to go to the manager or go to appeals. So you can try the assistance line. You may have a lot of luck with them. They may be great. One trick you can do, I'll take this from Bob McKenzie. Most of you heard Bob McKenzie either on the webinar or in person speak. And one of my favorite bits of advice he has is when you're talking to ACS, never hang up when they're talking. Hang up while you're talking so it looks like you're disconnected. Then you call back, oh, I'm so sorry, I got disconnected. I was talking to them about this, and you get somebody on the line. What I find, though, with ACS and with the penalty assistance line is that sometimes the meanest people are the most helpful, and the nicest people are useless. So you've got to get to the point where you determine, is this person going to help me? Are they just going to bust my chops? Are they just not going to give me what I want? Do they understand what I'm talking about? And then follow Bob McKenzie's advice in the middle of your own sentence. Hang up, and you got disconnected. It's amazing how that happens. And they're happy with it. They don't have to deal with you anymore. So keep on the lookout of the penalty assistance line. We have found that they ask for it in writing more than ACS does. And you may have different, it works for you differently. So here's a great secret of something that you must do. You must go way back on your 2848, or they won't take a look at this. So what we do is we go back to at least 2000. If they have early 2000 returns, I'll go back to 95. We always go back as far as we can because they won't deal with us and look at the other years if we don't have power of attorney. So always go back as far as you can. I like doing that also because sometimes all of a sudden you find that the IRS wants an unfiled return, or there's an old debt, or maybe there's an old lien that you want to get withdrawn and you want to go back and look. So we always go far back in the past. We always go maximum in the future, so we don't have to ask for. I think you're allowed 2 or 3 years in the future. I'm not sure what we put down. I think we're putting down 2017 now, and we usually, most of our POAs are 2000 to 2017, so that we can take care of it. The other thing we're always sure to do, and be on the lookout for this, just as a real aside, on payroll tax cases, I like to get the POA of the owner of the company who they probably will assess trust fund tax and get a power of attorney for him, not only for the individual, but for the trust fund penalty. Because if you don't have that in with the IRS and they're ready to assess the trust fund, they're not going to tell you about it. They're going to go right to the person you think's your client. So make sure you've got POA for that individual, just as an aside. But in these cases, when we're dealing with the good folks at the IRS, we want to go back as far as we can. The reason is closed years are eligible for first-time abatement. Now, I know what you're thinking, and I know what a lot of people at the IRS are thinking, and certainly the revenue officer I talked to yesterday is thinking, how can we go back to a tax where the refund time has lapsed? Tax is older than 3 years old. It was paid more than 2 years ago. How can we go back? I don't know, but we can. We got a first-time abatement on a case recently where they qualified in the late 90s. Because we're not getting a refund, we're getting a credit. And they'll move a credit to the current year. So don't take no for an answer. When I call them in and my taxpayer owes 2009 to the present, and I say, I want a 2009 abatement, and they say, well, look at this. We see in 2006 he had a penalty. Okay, give me it on 2006. Oh, we see 2005. I'll take 2005. Move it over to 2009. And I guess by definition, you should find a year for most people where they had 3 years of compliance where they didn't have any penalty. And if you can find that, they will move it. If they say no, try somebody else at the IRS. And I'm telling you, they will ultimately say yes, and they will ultimately give you a credit on an old year. Now, hopefully the credit's in the thousands of dollars, not $500, but it is what it is. It's really found money on some of these cases, so be sure to go as far back as you can. And when you get all of the transcripts, you should be able to tell which years have the penalties and which years don't. All right, and finally, we're not sure what the number is. If you look at the IRS manual, it's redacted. You can't see it. It's a bunch of number signs in a row. We don't know what the ceiling is on requesting an oral penalty abatement for a first time. It appears to be $10,000. And then you have to write a letter. However, we have had over $20,000 abated by having the second or third person we talk to manually do it. If you get somebody that really wants to work that day, I know it's tough when you call over there, you get somebody who really wants to work, really wants to take care of it, they will manually enter it. We've had them go above the $10,000 range. Very often, though, they will ask for it in writing. You get it in writing, and you send it in writing, and you will get the penalty abated on a first-time penalty abatement. What happens if you don't hear from them? Well, like anything else, you can do it again and hope it takes. And in theory, you could always even go to the taxpayer advocate if no one's really answering you over a long period of time, especially if you're dealing with a great deal of money. So do ask them to do manually. If it doesn't work, try again. See if you can get somebody else to do it manually. We don't know what the threshold is, but we have seen them go over $10,000, and I think that's the threshold. So kind of is what it is. Now, let's take some questions, Julie, and some comments. What do we have? All right, and that's Julie, ladies and gentlemen. All right, let me see if I can find Julie. Where are you? They must have a storm in Buffalo in November. Let's see. I see John DeLucci says he just got first-time penalty abatement from a revenue officer for over $15,000. I don't know, John, if you had to write that in or you're able to do it orally, but that's a great result. And that's what you got to ask for. It still is requiring 3 years prior of no penalty, correct, not quarters. Okay, here's a good question for Richard Ebbinghaus. He says for trust fund penalty abatement, it still is requiring 3 years prior not 3/4? And that's a great question. The answer, I was always hoping it was 3/4, but it appears to be 3 years. We've gotten roadblocks on the 3/4 argument. And if the IRS does not want to obey, James Corvino writes, over the 10, you say thanks and goodbye and call back. Yeah, I think that's a good thing. But if you write it in, they'll do it. If you want to take another shot the next time you call, then just do a written request, and that should work. And it looks like John mentioned also he did it with the revenue officer when he got the $15,000 by just writing them a letter. But you do have to educate. This is one of the few times ACS kind of knows more about this than the revenue officers. They're clueless. No one's asking them for first-time penalty abatement, so you need to be the one to do it. Hold on, let's take a look. Yeah, well, here Yolanda Johnson writes, should we wait until the client is ready to pay the outstanding taxes before asking for the abatement? If we abate too soon and the taxpayer doesn't pay, then the interest accrues on the larger balance. Well, what happens is, yeah, if you abate too soon, you can abate again, as I said before, at the end of the case when you've paid the tax. So oftentimes, sometimes you want to abate a large amount of money so that the installment agreement you're getting into, even if it's over 50, you may be able to get a 6-year installment agreement, and the IRS will allow all the expenses. And, your client may want to pay $1,000 a month, and you can do that if you get the abatement now rather than $1,500 a month if you don't get it. You can get first-time penalty abatement on the civil penalty. No, because there is no penalty on the civil penalty, so there's nothing to abate. You can get it on the payroll tax, not that. Yeah, it's all on the income tax. Julie, are you there?
I'm there.
All right, what do you have for us, Julie? Anything else that I missed? I was going through some of the questions.
Yeah, we do have a couple more.
Okay.
Do you have a written form letter that people can submit rather than get on the phone?
Well, I like doing it on the phone because we know it gets done. When you mail into the IRS, sometimes you just want to shred your mail to them and save them the opportunity to do it, because sometimes they just don't pay attention. So I really like doing it on the phone. But the penalty abatement we ask for is simple. I mean, if we have reasonable cause, we always put that in with a little paragraph citing the IRM saying that we want a first-time abatement. If we have no reasonable cause at all and we're not going to go that route, we just write it in requesting a first-time penalty abatement, citing the IRM, pull the IRM, copy and paste a couple of sections, throw it in, and say you want the abatement. It's good if you know what year you're doing. We always try to request the year we want to see if we can get it done. What else, Julie?
Okay. If you have a smaller balance on a penalty in front of a larger balance, can you pay the smaller one and then get abatement on the larger?
No, that won't work, because they'll look and they'll see that there was a penalty. You're stuck with the first year. You just got to hope that's a big year and that they didn't. And we see this happen a lot. They come with huge problems, but that year or so before, they had a relatively small penalty that they paid it all out, and we're stuck moving that one, unfortunately. We have had no success at all with picking and choosing. That's pretty straightforward.
For trust fund penalty abatement, is it still 3 years, or is it just the prior 3/4?
Oh, no, I'd answered that. There's no penalty on trust fund penalty. It's only on the payroll taxes that you can get done. Trust fund penalty is just what was withheld from employees, withholding Social Security, Medicare, along with the interest. But there's no penalty on the trust. That's how you can always remember. There's no penalty on the trust fund penalty because it's called a penalty. So why would there be a penalty on a penalty? I don't know, but there's no penalty.
Okay. And if you have a year where the taxpayer is assessed an underpayment penalty and a late filing penalty in the same year, can you get both of the penalties removed?
Yes, you get them both removed. They'll remove all the penalties. You don't have to choose the penalty you want for the year. They'll abate all penalties for that year.
Okay, and then we have just a little story somebody wrote in. They had a client who owed for 2012 and 2013 penalties about 60,000 in total, requested that 2013 get abated first, successful, waited a month and then called in for 2012. They abated as well, since prior 3 years have been clean.
That's great. Shouldn't have happened, but great. Because if I understood it right, they did have taxes in, they did have penalty in both years, you said, right?
Yes.
All right. Well, that's great. That's why you just try on this. I feel so bad. I tell you what it is, and I wouldn't be surprised with any story I hear on this. And I do see one comment here that a couple of revenue officers have told someone that that significant amount is less than $100, which is what I said. They do have it in there. They just won't tell you what it is.
Is the phone lines for the penalty abatement lines faster than normally calling practitioners priority line?
I found it is. And as I said, in researching this, I called them a few times to get some answers, of which I didn't get. But I did find that the wait times were relatively short. I got through pretty quick. Not a lot of people know about the penalty assistance line. But as I said, we have mixed feelings here as far as that works. So we're just doing it through ACS. And what we do is, we always have the music on in the background. Somebody's always on hold with the IRS, waiting for them to pick up, hoping that they don't disconnect us. If they do, we just call back. And ultimately, we end up speaking to somebody every day.
Can you use the first-time penalty abatement on audit penalties?
No, you can't. That's a good question. And I know because we tried, and we don't even try anymore. If you have a accuracy penalty or negligence penalty, and you try to get a first-time abatement, I don't have them given it to us during the audit, and I don't have them give it to us after the audit. If someone's had it done, please let me know, and I'll start trying again. But no luck on that whatsoever. The way to do it is we just protest at the time of the audit. There's some cases where, we agree on everything, but I fight the penalty abatement, especially when I really don't think that the taxpayer was negligent. But you can't use it. It's not an argument to make.
Okay, and how long should it take to hear from a penalty abatement mailed into the service center?
Generally, we hear back in a couple of weeks. I think it runs between 2 and 6 weeks in the office. But we do end up getting it done. We've had some real good luck with getting it, really having them just send it in right away without a lot of fanfare. But, like anything else, it depends whose desk it falls on. If that person's out on maternity leave, you might be out for a few months. No one's picking up their stuff. But we've had some pretty good response on it. This has been it's really been a great tool that we've used. We've been very happy with it. And we even, not long ago, we pulled an old case for whatever reason. I can't remember if the guy had called us or maybe we got some sort of letter. And we said, let's get a penalty abatement on this guy. And we got an old penalty abatement. We got it credited towards something. I think he was on an installment agreement, but I hadn't talked to him in a long time. Boy, was he thrilled to hear that. Out of nowhere, he just saved several $1,000s.
We have a couple people asking, can you get the first-time penalty abatement on an accuracy-related penalty?
No, that's what I was talking about on the audit. They don't give it on the first-time penalty abatement. There's nothing in here. Well, there's nothing in the IRM that says there's not, but there's nothing in there saying that section of the code can get an abatement. It's not listed as one of the you can'ts, but it's definitely not listed as you can. The only thing listed is the failure to file, failure to pay, and failure to deposit. And as I said before, we've had absolutely no success. They just say it doesn't apply. And from what I can see, it doesn't.
Okay, and what happens if you request a first-time penalty abatement after the last payment of the installment agreement, or for a paid-off year that was paid a few years ago?
They'll put it into a If there's still some tax owed, they'll apply it to a new year, or they'll refund the money. Now, let's say someone's on a penalty, on a installment agreement, they're paying $500 a month for 10 months. They've already paid that in, and I call and I get a first-time penalty abatement, they'll get the $5,000 back. If that's it, if they don't owe any more money on it. So what we try to do, and it's different in every case, is when the number gets down on the earliest year low enough, we get the first-time abatement and blow that year off and move into the newer years.
Okay, that sounds great. So I think that's good to wrap things up. If anybody has any other questions, you can email them to us and we'll do our best to get them answered. If
Okay.
you are interested in still learning more on penalty abatement, we're going to offer a 2-day 20% off of any recorded penalty abatement session in our catalog. So look out for an email on that offer. And
one other thing, Julie, just to close, I just wanted to say that this is a way to offer tremendous value to your clients. And what we do is all about value. Somebody can do it on their own, or they can just take care of us. We have no value. And something like this, in theory, they can do on their own, but we can get it done. We can do it right for them. Don't leave any money on the table. You know the IRS doesn't leave any money on the table. If there's an ability to pay, they want it all. If we're entitled to money back, we should get it. Every case, you should be looking at this and seeing what you can save the client, because saving the client money makes him or her very happy. And happy clients are very good for business.
all right, thank you so much, Steve, for everything. If anybody would like to listen in on the webinar, again, it will be posted in the member section of our website within the next 48 hours. And we will see you on the next webinar. Thanks.
Thanks, Julie.